Good afternoon, Robbo. How's it going?
Hey, Tom, all good, thank you.
It's a sunny one out there, isn't it?
At last, we had a bit of a rainy week, but more importantly, we've just completed our first recording that we've ever done.
Yeah, it is official. Tom Anderson and Rob Blythe are the proud, what are we, owners, makers, intellectual rights, caretakers, custodians of a new podcast, the Crest podcast. And we just recorded our first episode.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. We had fun. We talked about several things. We won't go into detail here, but we mentioned surf trips. We talked about the current situation in international surfing. We also looked at it from a Welsh perspective, amongst lots of other things. Lots of laughs in between as well.
Yeah, we tried. So we got people might have suffered our voices before at the public announcement systems of various surf contests and the odd Welsh Coast Awards night, but let's dust it off and find out what we sound like in what's this, digital.
In digital, and hopefully the first of many to come. So here you are. Enjoy the show. Coming up on this inaugural episode of Crest.
Where would we be in a world without goats? And of course we mean sporting goats, not goaty goats.
We discuss the implications of further postponement on competitive surfing scenes both abroad and here in Wales.
And who misses surf trips? Not us. We discuss the worst surf trips ever.
So it's official. The Crest podcast is underway. To my left is a man who recently placed second on web-based news outlet Glamorgan Online's list of up-and-comers in the Bridgend surf literary scene. It's Tom Anderson. How are you, Tom?
Very well, Rob. How about you?
All good, thank you. And of course, just mentioning back to that news there, Wyn Thomas, of course, took top spot with his breakthrough surf novel, Finnegan's Wave. You read it?
Finnegan's Wave. Oh, I tell you what. The Finnegans that I keep thinking of is that fish and chip shop down here, Finnegan's, which they've just opened up again. Delicious food. Tony John, the surf photographer, he fries a mean fish. Finnegan's Wave, though, don't know that one.
Well, it's a tale of dreaming about surf trips. Took 17 years to write.
Well, gosh, Robbo, my intro for you was all serious. That's some script writing you got going on there. Right. Oh, I'm going to have to do something a bit more ad-lib than that. Let me have a think. Okay. To my right is... I'll just go retro on this. The ringmaster from Ringland, although his mum used to wallop me for saying that on the PA system at contests, so at least the lockdown is good for one thing, keep me safe from that. The second best karaoke singer in the world, after the mysteriously good-looking man singing back at him from the mirror, of course. French exile, of course. Newport's own Robert Webster Blythe.
Well, thanks, Tom. But given your standing in the lit scene, I'd have thought you'd have managed to write something half decent there. But seriously, though, what's the plan for this podcast going forward?
This is something we've both talked about on and off for a long time now, isn't it? And here we are. Time is on our hands. Time is also on listeners' hands, too, in many cases. I'm minded to think of Mark Twain, I think describes Huckleberry Finn as having a troublesome superabundance of the kind of time which is not money. I always thought that sounded both great and horrible at the same time. But we've always wanted to put a podcast together that could work its way through some of the fabulous stories that you hear around surf culture and around Wales's surf culture. I think surfers, present company excluded, alas, although it's not for the want of trying, of course, are some of the best raconteurs in the world. And Wales itself has such a good tradition for great yarns as well. So many great characters in surfing, isn't there? And the wider world of surf culture beyond Wales is the same. So also it's a chance for us to cover the surf communities that we're from and spend our lives in and around. And then, of course, it is pretty widely known that you and I love to yak, don't we?
You got that right, Tom. And we've got some yakking coming up. We'll be working our way through a Legends series of interviews, so give us a shout if you think that you qualify. We've got a surprise ready for episode 2, as it happens right from the summit of surf literature. Our very next episode will be joined by the writer Andy Martin, whose time on the north shore of Oahu has allowed him to put out a couple of incredible surf books, Walking on Water, Stealing the Wave, which is, of course, the inside story of events surrounding the eventually fatal big wave rivalry between Ken Bradshaw and Mark Fu. And Andy's going to chew the fat with us too. Isn't that right?
Yeah, he's got a new book out, Surf, Sweat and Tears, about the life and death of Ted Deerhurst, the Lord on a board, Lord Ted, which is, again, a tale that Andy's had a front seat for a lot of. I've read a preview copy of the book, actually, and it is epic, so it should be really interesting to see what Andy's got to say in conversation. Anyway, moving on to why we've come to be here today in this situation.
Terribly sorry to interrupt you there, Tom. I've got 2 texts already from people who are asking to be interviewed in the immediate episodes of Crest after Andy. Any guesses who?
I've got to try and guess. Well, that was pretty quick and pretty keen, so I'm going to say Logan Nicol.
In one.
Right. Was Logan the second text too, like following it up to show how keen he was?
Not quite. Greg Owen.
Oh, of course it was. I tell you what, he makes a good interviewee, actually. Well, let's book him in. Okay, yeah, so it would be remiss of us not to mention the less than desirable situation which has led to us being here today at home, looking out the windows. Of course, we all would change it if we could, but glass half full and all that. I'm sure you've read at least one of the many reminders by the mainstream media right now that King Lear was in fact written during a lockdown for plague in 1606, so good things can be created from crap circumstances.
Right. I'm going to interject there, Tom. I think there needs to be some kind of swear jar type deal. Every time you mention Shakespeare or anything like that, there's a penalty of some kind.
All right, fine by me. Hey, tell you what, though, right? There needs to be one for Rob too, then, for every time you mention Hossiger. Is that a deal?
Yeah, okay, righto. That's pretty much half of our conversation gone in one then, Tom.
Yeah, shouldn't be too much of a hindrance for us, though. We'll still manage. Now, I know it's a lure for most surfing podcasts to talk about some of the negative situations out there because of the novel coronavirus. We won't shy away from heavy chat if we need to in coming episodes, but perhaps not for our first one, eh? One of the good things, a few good things, but one of them, I've seen plenty about how wildlife is making a prolific comeback in many of the world's traditionally more populous spaces. And surely, Robbo, did you see the video of Llandudno's town centre getting overrun by goats?
I did.
Yeah, indeed. The sleepy northern beach town was invaded by none other than 122 Kashmiri goats. They were having a ball. Well, I watched it and my mind went sideways and thought, well, those goats, they're thinking, where would we be in a world without people? And I thought, fair enough. But where would we, people, be in a world without goats? And then, of course, if we shift to the American acronym, GOAT, G-O-A-T, greatest of all time, then it makes for a proper good topic for some sportscasters. Have you seen the any of the Bulls documentary on Netflix, by the way, the Chicago Bulls one, Last Stand?
I haven't seen it yet. I've heard about it. I've been watching a bit of the test, the documentary about the fallout after the cheating scandal that rocked Australian cricket a couple of years ago.
Oh, that sounds. I'll have to have a look at that.
It's really, honestly, really, really good.
Yeah, well, I recommend this Bulls one. Just looking at the sort of the mindset behind, I suppose the original GOAT in sports, Michael Jordan. But let's talk about goats and surfing. Goaty goats, not goaty goats. Goats, greatest of all time. Question for you here now, Rob. Right, I've been geeking out a little bit. Right, what do the following surfers have in common? Lakey Peterson, Sally Fitzgibbons, Geordie Smith, Sylvana Lima, Bede Durbridge, Melanie Redmond Carr, Kayala Kennelly, Jacqueline Silver, Megan Abubo, Mick Campbell, Shane Beshan, Rob Machado, and Shane Powell.
I'm sure you're going to tell me.
What they have in common is that they would all have their names on the list of world surfing champions if there had been no such thing as surfing's goats. So if Kelly Slater, Lane Beachley, or Stephanie Gilmore, of course, who Beachley and Gilmore co-hold the record for the most world titles in ladies surfing, and Slater is the most world titles in men's surfing. If those guys hadn't existed, those guys would all have would all have world titles. There's a few people who'd have had extra world titles as well. Andy Irons for one. But those are guys who never won one. In fact, two of them, Silvana Lima and Melanie Redmond Carr, would have won 2 world titles each if it hadn't been for the existence of Stephanie Gilmore. So these are guys who've got multiple second places.
Okay.
So what's the world look like if those guys had been world champions? What would surfing look like if Rob Machado had been a world champion?
Well, it'd certainly change the landscape somewhat, wouldn't it? Never really thought about it. It's quite an interesting one.
Because if you think about what Machado did with his career after coming so close in 95, I sort of wonder with him whether he never really wanted to put himself in that position again, because imagine how heartbreaking it must have been. I know there was the high five and all of this, but to get that close. And I wonder if the whole afro and the funky boards and everything that he's done since has always been a kind of like avoiding putting himself back there.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Do you think it haunts them? I mean, do you think it plays on their minds?
It would on mine. Well, I don't know. You've got a second. You've got a second in a Welsh, haven't you, Rob?
Yeah.
Which bloke stops you from being a Welsh champion?
Adam Jenkins of Swansea.
Oh, right. Oh, he was a one-off. He was as well, wasn't he?
Do you know what? No, I don't know. But it's a funny thing because I'm super competitive in most things, and I like competing in surfing largely for the fact that you get to see everybody and hang out. And I do like the whole thing about competing in surfing, but I'm not that fussed when I lose, which I've got quite good at doing actually.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't bother me after it. As soon as it's done, I don't think about it again.
So you've not lost sleep and wondered whether there was a different turn you could have done on one of those waves in that fight. Do you remember the final?
I do. It's me, Adam Jenkins, Mark Vaughan, and Josh Hughes. Middle Bay, Fresh West. It was really good surf as well. It was one of the most recent Welshes that we had really good waves and really good weather for.
Right. And do you remember your 2 waves? You've never thought about whether there was an point on one of them?
I remember one. It was a left, and I did like a little kind of credit card air on my backhand and didn't quite stick it. And I could have just done a turn, I suppose. But no, I didn't really contemplate it afterwards.
But maybe there's a Welsh title on the end of that credit card air.
Nah, I don't think so. And do you know what? I really genuinely haven't thought about it. And I find it hard to put myself in the position of people. Clearly, if you're going to reach the upper echelons of sport, like the people we're discussing have, I think you have something else. There's like an extra level of competitiveness that I just don't have.
Yeah, interesting. Do you think any of these guys here? Well, I said Melanie Redmond Carr and Silvana Lima, we know would have won 2 titles. Do you think any of these guys here would have bounced on to become like have a massive shot of confidence and suddenly become like somebody super dominant? You look at that list, Rob Machado.
Well, the name that stands out to me above them all for being very competitive is Shane Beschen. He always seemed to have like that fire burning in him.
Because if perhaps Parkinson won his world title. Was it Parkinson who had a really narrow miss? And then once he'd won 1 world title, did he manage to win a second? Did Parker manage to win a second after winning one?
He got the one. He got the one, I think.
Oh, he got the one. I'm trying to think of times when somebody, get the monkey off your back. So I wonder whether, Fanning. Oh, it is Fanning, is it? So if Beschen had got that monkey off his back, if Beschen had got that monkey off his back in 1996, do you think he would have then gone on to become, a multiple world champion?
You can't possibly say, can you? I mean, without Slater on the scene, perhaps you'd have had like you say, the landscape would have been completely different. You'd have had perhaps even different people fighting out in the top 5, top 10.
Yeah, I reckon there's only one person on this list who still might rear their head as a world champion future, and that's Lakey Peterson. I think Geordie Smith a little bit probably now. Can you really see Geordie Smith managing to keep up with like the John Johns and the Toledos and the Ferreiras and Medinas of this world?
Well, last year he gave it a good crack of the whip, didn't he?
Yeah.
He was looking sharp. He was looking fit. From what I've seen on social media, he spent last winter in Hawaii training.
Yeah.
Well,
I think he lives there now, doesn't he?
A considerable amount of training, and perhaps that this was going to be his year, but we'll never know now.
Yeah. So, yeah, I can equally see Lakey Peterson being one of those always the bridesmaids. Felipe Toledo's always the bridesmaid nowadays as well, isn't he?
Well, it's early days in his career. Forget how young he is because he seems to have been around forever. But in fact, all that so-called Brazilian storm are still really quite youthful, aren't they? They've got a lot
Very
of
much so,
time
yeah.
ahead of them. The other
Greg
person,
Owen. Go on.
go on, after you.
Talk about Greg Owen, and I was gonna move from the WSL to the WSF. I was just
Okay.
gonna say Greg Owen got lots of seconds in the 90s in Wales, and then I think it was 99. No, it was 2000. 2000, glorious sunny weekend in Fresh West. Greg Owen won one, and then he broke the monkey's back and went on to win multiple titles from there.
Yeah, how many has he got in the Open?
3, I think.
3.
He'll text you if it's not.
Keep
Will
my phone
there
on.
be another GOAT?
In international surfing or Welsh surfing?
Well, let's try both. Go on then, international first.
I mean, of the current crop of people on the CTE, I can't see anybody coming close to matching Slater's 11.
Right.
Just because of the time it requires to win 11 world titles.
Gilmore or Beachley in the ladies with Caroline Marks, or do you think?
Perhaps, yeah. Caroline Marks is still super young.
Yeah,
It's so hard to predict these things, isn't it? You could argue that someone like Gabriel Medina could go on a bit of a spree now, a winning spree over the coming years, but it's still going to take. Well, how many has Gabe got now? He's got 2.
2.
So he's got another. He'd have to win for the next 9 years straight to match Kelly.
It's not going to happen, is it?
No.
Do you know one of the stories I love? Right, this was not a first-hand story, but it was told to me by a very reliable person who comes from the Sydney area. That there was in the very early 90s a massive rivalry between Kelly Slater and another guy called Shane Herring. Do you know much about him?
Harrow, big time.
Now Shane Herring, apparently you can still find him around his hometown of DY. He's got a bit of a beard. He's fishing. He's usually got a beer in his hand. He's happy and well, but he's a complete burnout as far as competitive surfing goes. But the tale goes that Slater and Shane Herring were neck and neck at the end of the 80s and early 90s, as whether America or Australia were going to dominate the next decade of surfing. And both of them were wearing that kind of country pressure on their backs, as in, either America or Australia. You're representing your half of the surfing world really at that stage. And apparently, they used to duel a lot in free surfing. And a friend of mine says that he saw them surfing the point at DY when it was right heavy, right up the back of the point, taking off real deep. And it's Shane Herring's local. And he said that Shane Herring got one of the best barrels he's ever seen in his life at DY. Spat out, dredging inside out below sea level ledge. And then he says that Slater was in the water and he saw Slater's eyes quicken and his shoulders rise and his neck deep, drop into the water, and he paddled as hard as he could to the top of the point. And within 10 minutes had just eclipsed the top DY local as having ridden the best barrel anyone had ever seen at DY, and that he could see that Herring was gutted. And he reckoned that most of the guys in DY reckon that basically if Shane Herring had beaten Slater to that first bunch of competitive victories, Slater might have crumbled and Shane Herring might have been, 11 times world champ, and Slater would just be a chubby fisherman on a pier in Cocoa Beach.
It sounds like Aussie folklore.
And what about our goats, PJ and Linda?
Certainly.
Do PJ and Linda then have, we think of them as legends, but is there in their wake a big long list of failures and other people's crushed dreams? Elliot Dudley, Splinter, are they as much dream crushers as dream makers, these guys? Is there a whole host of dejected people walking around gutted because their one chance to make it big in contest was crushed by one of these goats?
Maybe, but what good's a victory if you can't beat the best people at the game?
True. And then I think the same can be said of Rob Blythe in Welsh Coast Surf Club comps, because there must be loads of local people who would have picked up their one chance at a surf comp if it wasn't for those big long arms of the Blythe.
Now, we tend to take it in turns, don't we? There's about 4 or 5 of us that take a year each in our local comps.
Yeah, Sagey's turn last, doesn't it?
Yes, there we are. Well, speaking of Welsh comps, Tom, I had a chat with the Welsh Surfing Federation's very own Mark Vaughan this week.
Or future guest on the show, I'm told.
Let's hope so. He's quite elusive at the moment, is Mark, but We will try to get him on at some point. But before we go into Welsh Surfing Federation news and competitions in Wales, let's first of all talk through some of the news affecting surfing on an international level. This week, we have seen some big announcements coming from the WSL's new CEO, Eric Logan. You seen anything of what he's been saying, Tom?
Yeah, is it carefully ambiguous?
Would you like me to tell you?
Yes, I would love you to.
Okay.
I can see you've got paper.
I have. Research has been done. So 6 weeks on from the World Tour's first postponement, WSL CEO Eric Logan has provided another message this week, letting fans know that competitive surfing has indeed been postponed until at least the end of June.
Oh, does that mean no G-Land?
It does. And do you know what? It's taken quite some time to look into this, because I could not find, for love nor money, any information on the WSL's own website. I had to go to the Guardian newspaper of all places. Yeah, honestly, I had to go to they had the most reputable information on it. Eventually, I should say that I did, after some careful digging, manage to get to a press section of the WSL website and get some information, but it wasn't readily available. So, to quote Eric Logan, "Where and when we'll run this year is still very much an open question, but we'll continue to work with governments, World Health authorities, and our local communities on returning to the lineup." So, like I say, after a bit of digging, it turns out that Snapper, the Quicksilver Pro on the Gold Coast, is the only event that's actually, or on the CT, that's actually been cancelled. As it stands, all the rest have just been postponed. So that's Bells, that's Margaret River, that's Rio, that's G-Land. Well, I know you're interested in G-Land. G-Land is definitely not going to run at G-Land. But there's a good chance it could run somewhere in Indonesia, but with slightly more infrastructure. So I'm thinking perhaps another Uluwatu contest or Padang, something like that.
I loved watching that Ulus contest.
Yeah, well, do you remember when they did the search at Padang and Slater did had that switch 10?
Oh, yeah.
That was insane.
And I remember some great waves by Bruce Irons at that comp as well.
It was a really good one. So that's the case, yeah. No G-Land this year, but the rest are postponed rather than cancelled. However, so I kind of like the way politicians would add something onto some bit of law getting passed through the House of Commons. The WSL
very bad news, as they say.
Yeah, the WSL have announced some sweeping changes to the face of professional surfing for the coming year. And there's been talk of it for a little while. I think their plans were afoot to change things for 2022. However, and again, I quote Eric Logan on this, "Our pause due to COVID really allowed us to see that now is the time to accelerate these changes."
Oh, so and the changes, 2022 changes forward to 2021, are they?
Indeed, and the changes are quite sweeping. So the way it looks, for those of you that haven't kept up with this information, is that the tour will, by and large, look the same throughout the whole year. However, the world title will be decided on the last day of, as it's been deemed recently, the season. I'm not sure if I like that terminology. I don't really like surfing's not a traditional sport. It shouldn't be talked about in terms of seasons, but yes, it's going to go down to the last event. So all the events in the run up to it will act as some kind of qualifier or seeding rounds to come down to the Pipe Masters final. Kind of, if you recall last year, we had that big final day showdown, Italo Ferreira and Gabriel Medina to decide the world title. And I think they want to engineer that for future. They're quite savvy, these guys. Eric Logan, of course, coming from Oprah Winfrey's production company. Right. He's got big ideas, how to monetize surfing, and I think this is part of that.
What I will say, I've been twice now to London to watch the NFL, and I will say that American sports are perfectly designed to keep the tension to the last minute. You know, the way their rules and
playoffs kind of thing.
Together, but playoffs, but then it's the problem with playoffs, is that some team will be 16-0. And then in the end they'll slip up to the Patriots in a scrappy game, and you sometimes get it's the same if you think about promotion playoffs that we have in British sports, So I don't know what I think about playoffs.
Yeah,
by playoffs, that could have been somebody like Kanoa Igarashi could have won the world title off Medina and Ferreira at the last minute this year, then couldn't they? Someone in
and it's
type place.
Absolutely. And it's going to have, I think, any changes to any sport, but particularly surfing, where you'll find that I think surfers help kind of feel a sense of ownership over the sport. Unlike any other sport, there's going to be people that that there's going to be, it's going to have its detractors, should I say, and there's going to be people moaning about it. I really don't know what to think about it. I think some of the common criticisms that I can get on board with about the way surfing's gone in recent years under the WSL is that they're trying to make it too glossy and sell it to too wide a market. When my favorite time in pro surfing was that kind of late 90s, early 2000s, when it was kind of raw and scrappy, and you saw
we still had
Mick Campbell,
Huntington Beach contest.
Mick Campbell scrapping
crushed
with Andy Irons in the showers.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that kind of stuff. And
yeah, Mick Campbell beating Kelly Slater in like 2 foot Rio. And I remember that the surf was getting smaller and smaller. That was the 3-way race between Slater, Mick Campbell, and Danny Wills. And I remember a great interview with Barton Lynch. It was on one of Derek Hines' video diaries. And Barton Lynch saying, I don't know what these guys are all moaning about. Surf getting smaller. If this was back in the 80s, me and Duma Hardman, we'd be rubbing our hands together going, I hope it gets smaller. I think small wave surfing, I used to love watching small wave contests when the stakes are high.
It's not necessarily the small wave thing. I just think it was a bit more real, a bit more raw. And the way it's gone in recent years is they try and gloss over everything. When anything slightly off script happens, it's like a hush hush, isn't it? And if someone moans at the judges or snaps their board over their knee or swears at someone, it's kind of like papered over.
Are we on a slippery slope to just wave pools and schedules?
We'll save that one for another episode of this, shall we? It's a big old conversation.
Well, I'm sure it's going to come up in the future for us to talk about.
Yeah. So it's an interesting move, one that's going to be talked about for a long time, I'm sure. But that's it as it stands. But let me please bring it back to the Welsh Surfing Federation. Like I said, I've spoken to Mark this week, and I have the official line from the WSF. Again, another piece of paper is produced, and again, for those of you interested in the Welsh Surfing National Championships this year, I've got the update on the situation.
Obviously, it was for listeners over the border, over the bridge in England or Scotland or Jersey or wherever. This kind of ties into like the British scene as well, doesn't it? At the moment, because it's kind of like
I've got the wider. I've got the well. Mark was very forthcoming with the information. I've got the British view, and I've got the European and the international view on it with relation to the World Championships and the Olympics moving past that.
I'm keen to hear this.
So, just as a little bit of a backstory, the Welsh nationals were supposed to run back during Easter, as opposed to its traditional May Bank holiday weekend slot, because the British championships were due to be held up in Scotland in Thurso later in that, or just after the Easter weekend. So they had to have it early in order to select a team to send to it, because the way the British is structured.
So the Welsh is a qualifier for the British, yeah?
Absolutely. 4 surfers from each of the home nations get sent up to the British Championships. So it was supposed to go at Easter. Clearly, because of the situation that we all find ourselves in with COVID-19, the Welsh was postponed.
Right.
And the initial thought was that they might be able to run it on its usual date, which is May Bank holiday weekend, coming up next weekend. Of course,
and that's ended up a bit early.
Exactly. As we know, well, the situation's fluid. That was one of the things that Mark was really clear to point out, that they are responding to information. This is so hard to predict. I mean, national governments can't do it, so a sporting governing body is going to have a hard time doing it. So it's their main goal is to run it before the end of June. That's what they really want to do, and I'll explain the reasons behind that in a minute. But once again, Mark was really keen to point out that they're responding to the situation as it develops, and any decisions that are being made in conjunction with Sport Wales and in view of the regulations and advice coming from the Welsh Assembly government.
Right, of course. Because
first and foremost, of course, is everybody's health and safety that they want to consider. But the reason they want to get it done before the end of June is because in July and August, as it stands, the European Junior Championships are set to take place in Portugal. And
they haven't been cancelled yet.
There's been no change to the scheduling of that. Right. So they're still hopeful to pick a team for that and perhaps send one there. Of course, the surfing ban in Portugal has been lifted, but whether or not you can run a major event such as that remains to be seen. The other reason behind trying to hold the Nationals before the end of June is that the World Surfing Games is also due to be held later in the year. Now, that was supposed to be held in El Salvador in May, so this month, I believe. That, of course, has been postponed We think until December. Again, no official word on
December
it.
in El Salvador. That's interesting then, because what I will say is El Salvador. I've been to El Salvador in May, and it pumps. It's a south swell place.
Mhm.
So El Salvador in December, I'm not sure about the wave quality they'll get, but that's interesting. I suppose they've got much more important things to worry about at the moment, though.
Yeah, again, Mark's thinking behind that was apparently with the Olympics being postponed until next year, they
Right.
still Olympic qualification remains open.
Oh yeah, of
And
course, because they've got. Go on.
Sorry, I think under the laws of international sport, they're very complex, aren't they? And I think that the World Games need to take place before the year's out, so they're keen to get it done some point before the end of the year.
And they've got to, yeah, I mean, and they will have options like kind of closed doors type scenarios, won't they? Maybe even testing to make sure that, it's done in with the smallest possible number of people attending and things like that. But
Yeah,
I think there's up to 8 Olympic places still up for grabs from that comp, isn't there? And if a Welsh surfer were to make the Olympics, it's going to be through that contest, isn't it?
yes, indeed. So all very much up in the air at the moment, but they're hopeful. They are hopeful to get all these contests run, and like I say, they're reacting to information as it comes out and as the situation develops. So
I suppose
stay
the other
tuned
challenge
for that
facing
one.
the WSF and other organisations is going to be getting people to sort of join and pay their subs, I suppose, because if there's no events taking place, because they had to, that must be a challenge as well. Although they did manage to run the sword, didn't they? And that gets so most clubs join and the members join in time for the sword, don't they?
Yeah, it's again. I think that this is perhaps a topic for another podcast, but the effect that this whole situation is having on kind of sports at a grassroots level is incalculable, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I know with regards to our local surf club, they've started an initiative whereby they're offering free membership this year to anybody that's been a member or any current members as a gesture of goodwill. But you can make a donation. I'm going to be paying my full membership anyway.
Yeah,
so I
I'll
want to
pay
help the
my
club
full
out.
membership too, of course,
However,
yeah.
it's a nice gesture, but I think it's important that people, if you obviously cash is tight for a lot of people given the current situation, but if you can, I think it's still important to support your local businesses and your local clubs and keep them ticking over because they do so much for the local community. So,
And I have to say as well, Rob, you've done a great job on those quizzes for the Welsh Coast Surf Club that have been up through Facebook. And I reckon maybe you've recorded them as little individual standalone videos. Perhaps we can drop them on the Crestcast sites as well. So anyone
certainly.
who wants to try a surf quiz can hear Rob reading out some real good geekery. They're really good things. But those club communities are still taking place a little bit online, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, we've been having the quizzes every Friday night. I've done the first 2. Martin John took over the ropes last week, so I was a bit busy in work this week. But they're good, and if you, like you say, if you've got any kind of interest in surf history or trivia, or just fancy a little chat of a Friday evening, they're really good to tune into. However, you can also access them after they've happened. Like Tom said, we'll link it to this podcast to come the end.
Great stuff, Robbo. I'm sure your mum Anne is chomping at the bit to get amongst it with the tabulation again, as usual.
Yeah, well, do you know what? She's been a bit usurped in recent years at the Welsh, thanks to the modernisation of Welsh surfing, should we say, under Timmy Aylett's mentorship.
Digital judging, yeah.
However, what I will say is computers have a liability of, they are a liability and they quite often run out of battery or there's technical problems and you still need someone to tot up the scores, analog style.
Yeah, completely. Should we move on anyway to what else we were going to talk about here? With little prospects in the meantime, it pains me to say. I can't get through this line. With little prospects in the meantime of a surf trip. Fresh West right now, let's admit it, seeming like the other side of the world. We got to wondering how people are dealing with not being able to plan surf trips. Have you had anything cancelled yet, Robbo?
Yeah, my friend Tom and I were supposed to be in California over Easter.
Oh.
So actually, it's disappointing, but I got very little sympathy from anybody for that one. As it goes. But
I feel for you. I think it's tough for anyone in that situation. I do feel for you.
Well, we actually accepted vouchers instead of a refund on our flights, just to force us to go later. Well, as soon as things open up again. But what it's allowed me to do, had it run, it would have allowed me to attend the Welsh this year and get knocked out in the first or second round again.
Yeah, of course, yeah. No, I was supposed to get back from a trip actually the day before the Welsh, so I'd been trying to work out how I was gonna run that one past the family to get from Bristol Airport straight up to the Welsh. So it was nice not to have that problem at least. Yeah, I lost a trip to Peniche myself. What we did, we didn't take a voucher, but we actually put the refund into a common account, and it's being looked after. So the funds are there to try and run the trip again. But we'll see where we get to. I will say about California as well. My dad lives there, obviously, and I've spoken to him quite a lot through this. I don't think California is a good place to be right now. I don't think anywhere in the US is. But obviously, that's hopefully going to change down the line. And of course, there are much worse things going on than losing a trip to California or Peniche and getting a refund. I'm well aware. A mate of mine got locked down in Shikama for almost a month. He was part of that group that we heard about on the news in Peru, stranded there. Longest left in the world, northern Peru, and he was forced to watch it break almost the whole time because it was just coming into the season. I'm not sure if you've been to that place before. Have you, Rob?
I haven't, no.
Yeah, it's bleak. It's hard to stay there a long time, even when you can surf all day, which you usually can, by the way, because the wind doesn't blow on shore as much there, which is odd because it is a cold water, warm land setup. But so he had to basically watch fire in empty mile-long lefts all day for a month while he wasn't even allowed out of this little concrete hut.
Ouch. Goodness me.
So we got the idea about how to deal with this less than ideal situation anyway, didn't we, Rob?
Yep. So rather than longing after surf trips, let's think about all the reasons they can absolutely suck.
Of course.
So for the short term, we're introducing a semi-regular slot on Crestcast. Why we absolutely don't miss surf trips. We're looking for your most horrendous mishaps, because who needs the hassle of travel? The adventure, the exotic, the foreign tongues, the food and drink, those chilly red Indonesian sunsets and the warm nights as you feel the wind has dropped.
Hey, Robbo.
Yeah,
Get carried
sorry.
away there.
So who needs surf trips? Welcome to the worst surf trips. There are some recent candidates for this, of course. Our good friend Elliot being one. He's been, every single person in Welsh surfing, perhaps British surfing and beyond has seen it, thanks to his Instagram. But he's been on a bit of a around-the-world tour with his partner, Marie Claire. And, of course, it was cut short. They were ordered home by both.
My heart bled for him. My heart bled for him. I'd been dreading the end of Elliot's Instagram stories. They've left even more of a void in my life than Premier League football.
Right. We've queued up a few for this one, but I think it's important to say this feature is about mishaps that happen on surf trips, and we've termed it surf trips that suck. But Tom, I was thinking about this. The surfing aspect of a surf trip is if you're lucky, it's 50% of it. The vast majority of surf trip is made up by stuff that happens on land. And the things that happen on land, and quite often when things go wrong, it actually makes the story all that better and makes the trip what it is. So I've got a bit of a soft spot for things going awry on surf trips. However, at the time when they're happening, unless it's something drastic, which is of course is awful, when like these minor inconveniences happen, they're a nuisance. And I've got a couple of examples here. So February before last, I went to the Canary Islands with a couple of my mates. And it's one of the classic things that happen on surf trips, problem with the hire car. And I've got a copy here of the review.
What company are we talking? Oh, we probably can't say companies, can we?
Well, having watched how many times Ian Hislop's been sued on Have I Got News For You, I think it's important that we probably change the name. So I won't say the name. Instead, let's call it Cold Gar. Is the company.
Okay. All right. And shall we imagine that it's got like a kind of lurid yellowish sticker?
I mean, it might have. Yeah, that would be fine.
Yeah, kind of like the sort of like the Dino Rod logo of rental cars.
Yeah, we'll just pretend that this company exists. So,
okay.
Of course, one of the common things that happens when surf trips go wrong has to do with the hire car. I've heard some horror stories of people being charged all sorts for goodness knows what. Because apparently, insurance on hire cars doesn't cover the underside or the roof. So people that have incurred damage to their car on the underside of the roof have been lumbered with this massive bill at the end of their trip. But I digress. So I'm going to read out the review that my friend Joss posted on a review website after the trip. And bear with us because there's some funny bits in it. But Lots of you will be able to relate to it. Lots of you will probably experienced Coldgar yourselves or someone similar. So this is it. He's titled it. It comes in 3 chapters and a prologue, and it's called Pirates of the Canaries, Coldgar, Fuerteventura. And this is the prologue. Firstly, it's worth noting that I'm not typically one to write reviews, or even complain for that matter, and it takes something fairly considerable in order for me to spend a good chunk of my Sunday night writing such a review, but I feel this is worth it. Chapter 1. Arriving late at the airport on Saturday night, we were keen to get through quickly. Only one of the rental places had a long queue, inevitably ours. Coldgar. Stood for 20 minutes before moving as there was a lady arguing at the front about insurance. I thought, it's fine. I've paid for full coverage. I'm insured. After an hour, got to the front of the queue. The lady tells me I'm not insured. Note, this was an outright lie. I was insured. And that I must pay €135 extra for full coverage. I refused, and she got quite irate, but proceeded nonetheless to take a deposit of €1,400 off my credit card. She then asked me for a debit card to pay €105. I asked why, since my booking had told me that nothing more was to pay. Fuel and taxes. Right, so how does that work out at 95 cents a litre? I refused. But she pointed out that I couldn't take the car unless I paid it. She also rudely pointed at the queue behind me, saying I was wasting everyone's time. Reluctantly, I paid €105, as like everyone else, I wanted to get on with my holiday. I later realised the queues are purposeful and they try and make you feel bad for staying and arguing. Anyway, we got to the car and the aerial was missing, and there was a few scratches on the car that weren't marked on the sheet, but there was no one around, and rather than go back in queue for another 2 hours, because it was so late, we just took photos of them and emailed them to ourselves for a timestamp. Chapter 2. Halfway through the holiday, I heard a faint sound, so we pulled over. And sure enough, there was a nail and washer in the car tyre. However, this nail looked so worn that it looked like it had been there for a long time, although I obviously had no evidence. The tyre was still inflated and I could have carried on driving. However, I wasn't comfortable with this. So I called the Coldgar head office. I've got to be really careful saying that. The Coldgar head office. I asked them what they wanted me to do, and they were as much use as a chocolate teapot. I told them, look, I'm going to change over to the Space Saver and drive in and get another car. The woman on the phone replied, okay, I'll tell them to expect you coming. 2 hours later, I turned up at the front desk at the airport on the Space Saver. The guy there told me I'd have to go up to the office to discuss it. Heart sinking. Another queue whilst I watched people get shafted for fuel and insurance, including a girl in front of me crying because she didn't have enough money. There's also a chap behind me who was on his stag do and missed the first 3 hours because his car was scratched and there wasn't any recording of the damage. Whilst in the queue, I watched one lady behind the desk serve customers whilst 2 others moved bits of paper around, ignoring the huge queue. Absolutely disgraceful. And I wasn't sure whether this was again purposeful or not. Prepared for what was to come, I got to the front and was told I'd have to pay €200 for the tyre. I showed the lady on the desk the photo and explained to her that if I'd wanted to, I could have continued driving on the tyre with a nail in it and returned it 2 days later and no one would have known. She said it must have been me since they always check the cars between customers. As above, this is clearly not the case. She again told me there was a queue behind me and I pointed out politely that this was because she was causing the problems, not resolving them. I had to bite the bullet and pay €200 for the tyre. She did briefly try to sell me the super relax cover again on the new car before I told her where to go. Needless to say, the new car we were given had scratches and a missing aerial that were not marked on the sheet. Again, we took photos and emailed them to ourselves. Chapter 3. Returning the car to the airport, I was full of dread, worried what pain Coldgar would inflict on the last of my holiday. To my surprise, they didn't even check the car. The guy chucked the keys in with a bundle of others and we just walked off. This was the most painless part of the process, but I realised it's just because Coldgar are a shambles organisation and don't actually do any of their due diligence that sometimes would bite them. Anyway, I realised in hindsight...
The legal team can advise you that you're reading something that's in the public domain anyway.
Yeah. I realised in hindsight that I could have taken a key and scratched the side of the car and they could have probably never proved it was me due to their complete ineptitude. Fortunately, I had a great holiday, but this was a real downer on a week's holiday spending so much time at the airport. I witnessed so many people's holidays get off to a bad start, and I swore to myself that I would follow it up, which is what I'm doing now. Do yourselves a favour, go nowhere near Coldgar. I realise now that Coldgar rely on undercutting people on comparison websites, then fleecing you at the desk, which actually makes it significantly more expensive. My suspicion is that they are aware that this is a non-sustainable business model and they realise that their reputation will eventually catch up with them. My worry is that the owners get away with it and make a tidy profit doing so. How many holidays ruined before this point, I don't know. I'd love the owners to have stood in the queue for 2 hours and witnessed what I did. Anyway, that's it. Unfortunately, there is no happy ending other than to learn from it and try to make others aware so they don't make the same mistake. And the other happy ending about that story is that, of course, it helps us cope with the fact that we're not allowed on any surf trips at the moment, Tom.
Yeah. Do you know, though, we ignored that advice because I think we used the same company, didn't we, on a trip?
Yeah, we used it beforehand, though. We did it before.
And I've just remembered, actually, you stitching me up a treat on that trip because we realised that they were pretty dodgy and that if you made any mistake whatsoever with the car, you were going to have to pay a lot of money. And I think Gareth Hughes and Kieran Hughes, Fionn and Mia were on that trip as well, weren't they? And I remember them saying that someone had been charged a fortune by Cold, whatever they were, for Coldgar for not cleaning the car properly. So I made the mistake, really stupid, of going surfing quite a few times with the key just round a lace because I'd forgotten my aqua pack. And then one day it had salted up and wasn't working. And we were on the beach in Zavial and we were like, oh, it's the last day of the trip. And I remember thinking, right, well, let's just hope it dries out. So we put the key in the sun somewhere. And then I think I went surfing again and you and George Schofield sat with Gareth just chilling and having a beer. And when I came out the water, do you remember what happened? No, can you remember this?
Not really.
Oh, right. No, this was you. I came out of the water and the car had been nicked and it was missing. And I was like, of course it hadn't, because what had happened was I think you obviously played with the key while I was in the water and it must have like gone doop doop and started working again. And then you and George had gone, right, let's move the car. So you'd driven it halfway up the hill towards Ingrina and then let me stand around in my wetsuit for like an hour thinking the car had been nicked before eventually going, oh, look, there it is at the top of the hill.
I can't remember it.
The idea of having the car nicked. It was the idea of having one of Coldgar's cars nicked, which really, is enough to make you break out in a gold sweat.
Very nicely done. I can't actually remember it, but it does sound like something I would do.
Well, I tell you what, we're going to run this then as a regular feature on the show. I got a story. I'll hold it off for another one about getting stuck on a tiny island in Indonesia, which is quite. Oh, that also brings me out in a gold sweat. And we're also going to have a great guest down the line, Rhino Thomas, and he's got a great one about somebody jumping on the plane to the wrong city by accident, doesn't he? Yeah.
You and I actually, we remember when we went to Morocco and we were coming back. We were rushing for the flight. We were late for some reason. We had a ton of boards between us, and I think I was with Mum and Dad, and Mum and Briege.
It was the Carling Cup final, and it had gone to penalties. It was Chelsea against Arsenal. It had gone to penalties. And me and your dad decided to stay in the departure lounge to watch the penalty kicks, and you, your mum, and Briege went out and got on the flight.
Yeah.
Ahead of us.
I think Dad probably did it, not to watch the penalties, but to annoy the rest to annoy me and Mum by pretending to be late for the flight. Well,
that was it. And then but then it turned out me and your dad almost were late for the flight, and it was I think it was My Travel or Thompson or something like that.
Thompson.
And we were very sternly told to run across the runway and get onto this plane. So we're walking up the steps to this Thompson Airlines, and then your dad goes to me, "Oh, check this guy out!" And behind us is this bloke running as fast as he can, even later than us. And Bob goes, "Watch this." So as this bloke walks up the steps, your dad turns round to him and goes, "God, that was a bit of luck. Me and the boy almost got on the Birmingham flight by accident," which is obviously where we're flying to. And this bloke goes, "Birmingham? What?" And your dad points at like this green aeroplane jumbo jet with like Iranian Air Iran and like Arabic writing on the side of it, flying off down the runway about to take off, and goes, "All right, that's it over there." And this bloke turns round, runs down the steps, and starts running off after the Birmingham flight. So we were very, very unpopular with the Thompson Airways staff by the time we'd sat down on that plane.
I wonder if you made it to Tehran in the end.
Your dad was he was public enemy number one, absolutely getting on that man, and I think your mum was just as angry with him as the Thompson staff were.
No doubt, no doubt. But there we go. So, well, Tom, I think we've just about removed the Stoke from the room then, which of course was the objective, wasn't it? So,
yep, absolutely.
It's been a pleasure. That was it. The first episode of Crest is in the vault. What have we got coming up in the coming weeks? Well, we've got a Welsh Legends series, which is just around the corner. And in about a week, we should be on for dropping an exclusive chat with the surf scribe, Andy Martin, whose new book on Ted Deerhurst, Lord Ted, is out now. So that's it. Job done.
Cheers, Robbo.
See you. And, well, if you've made it this far, thanks for listening.
Yeah. The Alpha Vower and Hoyle Vower.
1, 2,